Welcome back. You're still tuned in to Salam Media. The time is 8:38, and in a bit we'll be now focusing on local politics and the political chessboard that's unfolding right here at home. Following the ANC's poor electoral performance in the 2024 general elections, particularly in Gauteng and KwaZulu-Natal, the party's National Working Committee has decided to reconfigure its provincial leadership structures. This comes after a significant drop in support, with KZN's vote share plummeting to just 16.99 and Gauteng seeing a steep decline to 34.8. The reconfiguration aims to address internal weaknesses and rebuild the party's standing, and to unpack the implications of this decision and, most importantly, its potential impact on a limping ANC. We are joined by political analyst Professor Sethulego Matebesi. Prof, thank you so much for joining us this morning. Always a pleasure having you on Salam Media. Good morning.
Hi, good morning, and good morning to your wonderful listeners.
I think, Prof, first and foremost, I know this always seems like a simple question to open up with, but I like asking it when, we try and review the ANC and how badly they did in the previous elections, because every analyst, every commentator seems to have a different opinion on why the African National Congress has experienced such a dramatic decline in electoral support, particularly in KZN and in Gauteng, two provinces which are very, very important and for the longest time were a stronghold of the ANC. And having, those two provinces' numbers dropping to almost unprecedented levels, what do you believe, from your analysis, from your observations, were the primary reasons for this dramatic decline?
To start off with, for me, it's a long-standing issue that, obviously, the trust in the organization has been eroding over time, and one way or the other. But I was one of those analysts who was at Galacta stage, even on the day of the elections, on the day of the announcement. I still didn't believe that the ANC will get below 45%, because I asked myself at that stage, what would have, contributed to that. But we should look at the presence of MK Party, but also the character of the ANC leaders that they currently have, internal battles within the African National Congress, and you've got also the South African Communist Party and other alliance partners who just a couple of a couple of days before the elections, Omans will come out and have different views about how the ANC have been governing. So all these factors together, you've got fewer and fewer cadres who goes out and actively vouch for the African National Congress. And that in itself, I strongly believe, has contributed to the significant drop in electoral support.
Let's focus a bit on this reconfiguration of leadership, structures. The ANC has chosen reconfiguration over disbandment or, reinforcement of provincial structures. From your perspective, what does this reconfiguration mean in practical terms? From what you heard Fikile Mbalula mention, the SG of the ANC right now, from what you picked up, when he made that announcement, in literal terms, what do you think it's going to look like? And does it sway away from the ANC's long tradition of democratic centralization, and everyone taking responsibility when it comes to the party and how well or how badly they did in the elections?
Well, on any other particular day, I don't think this decision by the African National Congress would have been a problem. But the ANC is, it never takes decisions that are very consistent and seems to be fair. And I can just take you a couple of years back. If it was an ANC-led, Free State led by an Ace Magashule, I don't think the ANC would have taken such a decision. Now they can take that because the environment is conducive, and that's why some members of the African National Congress believe that this clearly also smears of almost like an factionalism, where action now needs to be taken against leaders such as Banaza Lusufi, who have got to publicly pronounce his displeasure with the government of national unity. Because the question is, for me, has always been, if you talk about provinces, then obviously, because this was provincial and national elections, so the question is, why aren't the national executive NEC of the ANC also take the flag for this poor performance nationally?
Mm, mm, I think very, very important to make that point. But another point that really was interesting to note is the fact that the ANC decided not to interfere with government positions, such as the premiers and the MECs and deputy premiers and all of that. Do you think the separation between party and state, which we rarely see the ANC do, is strategic or merely symbolic?
Well, it could be strategic because even for us, it's very difficult to divorce the ANC as a party from government, although we know in practice it had to be like that. So when they make pronouncements, and remember what we see in the public domain, in the political landscape, it's a complete different story of what happens behind the scenes. Behind the scenes, they may be, obviously, and it's common sense that they will have meetings and engagement with these MECs who in any case represents the party. So what we see in the public domain does not necessarily mean that they no longer want to engage, because what happens with premiers, how they perform, and any other public representatives has a huge impact. It dents the image of the African National Congress. If you can also just look at the number of key senior members, even in the presidency now lately, who have serious allegations of corruption against them, and it seems as if no action is being taken by the organization.
Mm-hmm. There's some speculations, Prof, that the SG of the ANC, Fikile Mbalula's, reconfiguration efforts are in a lot of ways tied to his own alleged presidential ambitions. We know that there'll be an elective conference in 2027, if I'm not mistaken. Do you think this is a genuine attempt to rebuild the party, or are internal power struggles also at play? Because it almost feels like with Cyril Ramaphosa seemingly not going to stand for another term as ANC president. I know that he can stand as ANC president. It seems like there's a power vacuum within the organization itself. Usually with the ANC, you could almost kind of figure out who's going to be the next leader of the party while the current leader is still in seat. But right now, it looks dark. We are not sure. There are some speculations that Cyril himself wants a female candidate to stand, maybe a Khumbuzo Ntshavheni, who's very, very key as a minister in the presidency, and the factional battles between the RET forces is also at play. So there seems to be a spot up for grabs, and Fikile Mbalula could be setting himself up for that. What do you make of that?
No, well, I also believe there might be muted attempts by not only Fikile but various ANC leaders. But I don't think the ANC, despite all its challenges, it's an organization where it can now be misled by an individual, and in this case, it's Secretary General. If this matter was tabled, whatever, obviously the COVID agendas or clandestine agenda behind this agenda item about the reconfiguration. But fact of the matter is, every ANC member would have had, or NEC member would have had an opportunity to deliberate on this matter. So for me, I don't think in this instance that would have been possible for anyone now to be able to mislead the organization. But yes, these are internal dynamics that will come to fore, that will definitely affect every decision, raises suspicion, but that's the nature of an organization with such a large footprint as the African National Congress. But for me, even a bigger picture is just that consequence management, consistency. If they take decisions like this now, then what about other provinces? Why do you want to just reconfigure these particular two provinces? And we all know the trouble in KwaZulu-Natal, even way before the elections, with how some of the leaders there have conducted themselves. The chairperson sometimes wants to take over the platform where the premier is, and stuff like that. So there is a bit of a power struggle within these provinces. We've also seen, as I've indicated, the chairperson in KwaZulu and Gauteng, how we sometimes have now once again obviously peddled or demonstrated that perhaps he can go against the decisions that the ANC have done and do that in a public platforms. So these are some of the dynamics going forward that will also once again have huge implications for the party going forward.
And the two characters which are at the heart of this reconfiguration is obviously the provincial leaders of the two provinces. You have Panyaza Lesufi and Siboniso Duma for the KZN. How much does this reconfiguration risk alienating? I think what are two key provincial leaders in Panyaza and Siboniso Duma. What do you make of this? Do you think we will see a sidelining of them? You mentioned Panyaza Lesufi being very, very vocal against the government of national unity and what the national structures of the ANC ultimately came to forming this new government. These two characters, what can we make of them as we look forward to this reconfiguration?
No, I don't think they will be alienated. But remember, if you talk about your brand as a politician, we all know what these two leaders stands for, what they, the kind of pedigree and following that they have, and standing in politics. So this affects their brand because, for the very first time, questions will be during my tenure. There were doubts about my leadership capabilities. And that's why Panyaza already came out and say that instead of looking at what happened, we now need to look forward to see how we can strengthen and win back, voters. So already is already showing, almost like, disregarding or wanting to demonstrate to the national leadership to say, hey, please leave us alone and we will ensure that we attract and bring people back to the ANC. But going forward, definitely, it will create much more animosity within the African National Congress going forward, because remember, these leaders is not only about themselves, it's also about their branches, those who follow them, and that in itself will have a huge impact on the deliberations going forward. And as you correctly stated from the outset, the eye for some of these leaders have already been casted on the leadership battles of the African National Congress during its next elective conference. And unfortunately, I think that clouds their judgment, that clouds their sense of governance of the issues, the bread and butter issues that many South Africans are battling with, and an organization that needs to have a united front after, having fought such a fierce election, which I strongly believe that have dented the image of the ANC.
There are suggestions that this reconfiguration should also be extended to the NEC of the ANC, and they should also be held accountable, for the party's national decline. Do you agree with this sentiment? Should the reconfiguration extend to the National Executive Committee?
Yes, no, definitely. I believe that the national executive officer which obviously some say it has been informed by the National Working Committee. And sometimes with these NEC and even this National Working Committee, it also has to do with power plays. And if we all know that the stronger faction here is that of Ramaphosa. And people like Panyaza and Ndumiseni, once again, it's very difficult to place them, but we all know where they will draw to. And to those voices that will perhaps go against the NEC during the next sitting or even after the elections.
Mm, mm. And I think we're going to leave it on that note, Prof. Thank you so much for joining us and giving us, I think, very, very wonderful analysis and insights on the ANC as they try to reconfigure, as they try to, figure themselves out after that horrible, horrible showing in the general elections last year. And I'm sure there's going to be more to come as, the nitty gritties of this reconfiguration is going to be announced. But we're going to leave it here for now. Really, really appreciate it.
Thank you. Much appreciated.
There you go. That was Professor Sethulego Matebesi. He's a political analyst. And yeah, it's going to be interesting, eh? What do you think? I think most importantly, I think the question on everyone's lips when it comes to the African National Congress is simple. Are we starting to see the beginning of an end for, I think, one of the biggest political movements that the continent of Africa has ever seen? And I'm asking this question because there's a trend, particularly here in Southern Africa, where political parties, which are liberation movements, essentially. We've seen what happened in Botswana just a few months ago when they went to the elections, and the party that ran Botswana for almost 50 years, they're out. Seeing what's happening in Mozambique, most interestingly, Frelimo, one of Africa's foremost, liberation movements, one that was lauded region wide for how they were able to number one, just help the South Africans during apartheid times and how they were able to get, liberation for the people of Mozambique from decades and decades of Portuguese rule. And we also saw what's happening in Namibia, really, really, discontentment in the region when it comes to liberation movements. And the ANC, bearing the brunt of that trend. For the first time in history, not having a majority government. And is it that time? Are we seeing a decline in liberation movements and how popular they've become over the years? I read somewhere that, liberation movements, particularly in Africa, their lifespan is almost 100 years. How old is the ANC now? 113, 114? Hey? So is it time? Is it time that, it's over, man? Politics are shifting. These liberation movements have offered practically nothing, for these countries. Granted, they did a bit of work. They were wonderful, in garnering liberation, for South Africa. That's the ANC. But that's, there's a growing sense that you are just not it anymore. You're no longer the party of Nelson Mandela. You're no longer the party of O.R. Tambo. You're no longer the party of the people. I mean, something as simple as having the Secretary General of the ANC, Fikile Mbalula, going to Robben Island, a place that is so a stark reminder of our dark history as a country, a very dark place. And yeah, he rocked up there in a private yacht, accompanied by a millionaire or a billionaire. Hey? Yeah. Interesting times ahead for South Africa, and particularly for a party like the African National Congress, and how they try and find themselves. 2027 is around the corner. Local government elections, there are talks that they might happen in 2027 in February. I know a lot of people were thinking it's 2026, but it's 2027 in Feb. And yeah, it's going to be interesting how they do there. There's new players. There's MK who look very, very strong. You have the DA, who I think are using this government of national unity to push their agenda, to push their ministers. And I think after this term is over, they'll go back and say, look, we had a minister in this portfolio, in this portfolio, in this portfolio, and look how wonderful they've done. Because this is an opportunity for them to prove themselves. And well, the ANC ministers, I think complacency is a dull word to use when it comes to how they've approached their different portfolios over the years. But the truth is, it's not looking good for the ANC. And love them or hate them, it would be very, very sad to see them, deteriorate as much as they are right now. It would be very, very sad when the only time we read and know, or get some kind of information about the African National Congress, is when we read about them in history books, or when they're in the back benches of government with one or two seats, like we've seen with other political parties who are also very, very important in the liberation movement of South Africa, the likes of PAC. Hey, what happened there? They were very, very strong. Azapo, what happened there? So I don't know. Do you think the ANC might be facing the same reality as those parties, or the reality of the liberation movements of the African, well, certainly the Southern African region, and how they've lost popularity throughout the years? You can interact with us. Our studio line is 061 766 0355, or you can give us a call on 0116800355. Would you be happy with seeing an ANC which is not as integral to South Africa's government? Would that make you happy? What kind of feelings would you have if the ANC would be thrown into the dustbins of history, so to put it? I know it would be sad for me, because this is a very, very important organization. It's a political home for all South Africans. At some point, every South African identified with the ANC to some extent. And, they looked at the party as a liberation movement for all South Africans, despite of color, creed, or religion. So yeah, really interesting times ahead. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, you'll be listening to #Heard on Air. Where there was a really, really wonderful discussion on the Gaza ceasefire, and they were unpacking it very, very wonderfully on #Wednesday Nights with Inayat Wadi. He had really, really awesome guests. He had Dr. Shad Hamori, a lecturer at Kent Law School. He had our good friend Yumna El Said. She's an Al Jazeera English Gaza correspondent, and also Lina Abu Jarad, a Palestinian filmmaker, teacher, and activist. And yeah, they were just unpacking and slicing and dicing the ceasefire agreement and what it means for the people of Palestine. So when we come back from the break, you'll be listening to that. This is News and Views. We'll see you after this.